Okay, looking at the liturgical challenge, I fully intend to mine your church year stuff for curriculum. I really enjoyed that section where you just went through, because a lot of we do a lot of church year stuff in Methodism, obviously,
Right.
and looking at fresh spins on that is an eternal chore of a youth worker who writes. But
Yes.
to see a
Yes.
completely fresh perspective was very refreshing. I liked on page 187 you're quoting Peter Rollins, but in Christ there is neither Christian nor non-Christian. Do you mind speaking? It gives great words to the idea of the strong benevolent identity. Can you
Yeah.
speak to that just a little bit?
Sure. Well, I was quoting there from Peter Rollins' book Insurrection, where he does a reflection on 2 Corinthians chapter 5, sort of relating that with Galatians chapter 3. In 2 Corinthians 5, Paul says, that passage is very well known, if anyone is in Christ, it's a new creation. Everything's new if anyone's in Christ. And the next, right in that passage, Paul says, for that reason, we no longer recognize anyone according to the flesh. So it's very interesting. That passage is about identity in Christ and how that transforms the way we see other identities. And in Galatians 3, Paul says, in Christ there is neither male nor female, Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. What that means is that it's not as if once we become a Christian, we all become neutered, perish the thought. It's not as if we become a Christian, we have no ethnic identity anymore, no history anymore, no socioeconomic identity anymore. But if we're in Christ, we stop judging people according to those identities. We stop seeing people as us and them related to those identities. And this is where it really becomes tricky as a Christian. Here I'm writing a book on how to strengthen Christian identity, but strengthen it without hostility toward the other. And so what that would mean is, and I've experienced this to be increasingly true in my life. When I was a teenager, I was so eager, I'd just been converted, I was so eager to get my identity in Christ that I would, I'd probably do it again if I were a teenager. I wore a big cross, and if I had had a car, I would have had bumper stickers all over it, because I wanted to identify myself with Jesus. But there's a way that we can do that turns us then into kind of an elite or a group of people who we think we're important. My fellow Christians are important. And then, oh, you're just a Muslim. Oh, you're just a Buddhist. Oh, you know what I mean? That is so unlike Christ. So I think there's a way to hold Christian identity that when I meet you as a fellow Christian, and then I meet somebody who's Muslim, somebody who's Buddhist, somebody who's atheist, my heart is as warm, is fully warm to all of you, to use a good Wesleyan expression. My heart is full of love, regardless of who you are. Because I am a Christian, I love a Buddhist, a Muslim, a Jew, a fellow Christian, with a full heart of love. I'm not holding back from anyone.
Awesome. Still within that liturgical challenge, you talked about how we have a tendency to kind of soften our history, or we don't remember the polygamy, or we don't remember all these different things. And I tried to speak to this at the retreat. We had a planning retreat for Wild Goose, and I was trying to get words around this thought. And as I read your book, it came back to me in a better way. Is there a way? Do you think it's important? And is there a way that we can preserve our racism, sexism, and violence, that we can learn from it without perpetuating it?
Yes. When you say preserve, you mean preserve the memory of it, preserve the history of it. The way that this comes through to me is when I think back on Protestant history. And what we Protestants have tended to do is we start a new movement, a new denomination. And then after a while, some people say, that denomination isn't pure enough. We've got to be more pure. And they separate and form a new denomination. Now we've got everything right, including that detail that the last folks didn't. I call this the church of the last detail, or the church of the lost detail. And then what'll happen. That group will go, we're the pure ones. And then somebody will say, we're even purer. And there's a kind of naivete that comes from trying to be the next truly pure group. And I think that's certainly not what we need at this moment going forward. I think this is the point when we need to go back and say, wow, these are our failures, these are our faults. Look at what we did to the Jewish people through history. Look at what we did to the native peoples. when look at what we did wherever the missionary movement expanded, and unintentionally, with the gospel came the European economic and political power that managed to exploit labor and resources for the benefit of the European missionary sending countries. I mean, it's just devastating when you pay attention to our history. Add to that what our religion did to women for so long and what our religion does to LGBT people. And you just add it together. We've got a lot to be embarrassed about. And the last thing I want to do is cut that off and say, oh, they did that. I'm part of the pure. So that's, to me, there's a humility that comes. Now, the fact is, Muslims have their history of how they have mistreated and continue to mistreat people, including, in many places, a Christian minority. And people often who don't know about Buddhist history don't know some of the ugly sides of Buddhist history, purges of Buddhists who purged out all the Hindus and so on. Everybody's got their ugliness. And then we start to realize that this is a characteristic of human beings. And then I think when you see this us versus them thinking among human beings in general, then you start to be able to see Jesus' message as a message to everybody, to call all of us to a higher vision in how we relate one to the other.
That's the thing I come back to all the time with the youth, is that our history, because they grow up, they just take everything you say at face value. And just because I represent the church, I need you to understand, if you look back at the history of the church, and just in movies, TV, literature, anything, what you see over and over is that at any given point in its timeline, the church is doing something massively wrong. And there's not really any reason to believe that right now is any different. And if you guys, the young people, can begin to look for what we're doing wrong right now, maybe you can fix the next thing without without just buying into it because, oh, we've got it right now. We're more mature than that now, or we've come farther. Moving to the missional challenge, this is where youth ministry tries to put its boots on. I really loved this. It's just a quick quote from page 229. Actually, my page numbers may be wrong. I just realized I was looking at an unedited copy. But a Christian moves toward the other in friendship. We had and you talk some about the distrust that can occur there when we're divided for reasons, and when you try to cross those lines where that can be contentious. We had a situation in our town. There's a primarily black and African American church a block from here that was wiped out in the tornado that hit our town just over a year ago. And in the wake of the storm, our building was almost embarrassingly untouched. We needed a new roof, but we needed a new roof anyway. We were able to serve as the hub for volunteer stuff, and so we got held up. We got the nonprofit of the year award, whatever. And in the process of that, reached out to them. What do you need from us? And there were some hurdles to overcome because we had to begin by apologizing for not having been there already. We didn't have a relationship with them to extend a hand, and so the hand that came after the storm wasn't trusted. How do you overcome? How do we begin to? How does the Christian move towards the other without putting people in boxes and without saying, hey, we're here to be friends because you're black, gay, Jewish, poor, or just other? I mean, it's, especially like our time is a primarily white community. How do you intentionally form those relationships without making it about what they are?
Yes. Well, I think I have to give two seemingly contradictory answers to that, Kevin. I think the first one is we go back to our story, and in the biblical story, all people are created by God. All people are loved by God. All people are objects of God's great longing and grace and compassion. So if we really are interested in becoming Christ-like and godly people, then we will want to look at others more fully with the eyes of Christ and with God's loving eyes. And if that's the case, then we don't move to the other because they're other. We move to the other because that's how we move to everybody. We move toward people. Everyone we see, our eyes, our outlook is transformed. You know, so much of spirituality is a change in the way we see. I think that's what we all aspire to. That's maybe the alpha and the omega of the process. But in the middle, you know, from B to Y in the alphabet, is we are aware of our history. So if I'm a white guy, I have to be aware that I bring with me all of my white privilege and my male privilege and my American privilege. And so when I see someone who's not of that, who doesn't share that set of privileges, I have this process I go through where I have to not only try to see them with the eyes of Christ, but I have to imagine how they're seeing me based on their experience. And all of that, it requires what a brilliant theologian from Yale named Miroslav Volf calls double vision. I have to see things not just from my own perspective, but to try to empathize and enter into the other person's perspective and see. And if I can do that, that will affect the way I behave. So I don't know, I guess that sounds like a contradiction. In one way, I'm saying, look, just because you're a human being, I move toward you. But as I do that, I'm also aware that we both have a history, and the groups that we come from both have a history, and that's going to affect the way we relate.
Excellent. All right, the book is Why Did Jesus, Moses, the Buddha, and Mohammed Cross the Road? It's an excellent read. I encourage you to pick it up. Brian, thank you again for your time.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks, Kevin.